Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first in Church Beyond the Walls, brand new podcast that we put together here in Braniel Church. Thankfully, it's been financed by the ministries team of the Methodist Church in Ireland and the Home Mission Department as well. What we aim to do with this podcast is to have a chance to chat with some people from different contexts, different church backgrounds, and how mission and outreach looks like for them. And hopefully we can learn from one another as we do this. So the first guest, I thought we may as well start at home. And the first guest on the Church Beyond the Walls podcast is the Rev Jo Sweeney, who has been assisting us in Braniel for 6 years now and informed us a wee while ago that he's going to properly retire in the summer now. Believe it when we see it, as they say. Thanks for coming on, Joe, and having a wee bit of a yarn. Joe has been around the block. It's safe to say, haven't you, Joe? You've been around the block.
You could say that. Probably not as far around the block as others, but I've certainly seen a few different situations where the Methodist Church in Ireland has been very much to the fore. We're thinking of mission and outreach, so a wee bit of experience in that over the years that I've been in ministry. I should say now that although I'm well over retiring age, that I'd had a business career before I came into the church, but still been in ministry for upwards of 30 years.
Wow. And where has the ministry road taken you?
That's interesting because certainly the last 6 years in Braniel has been very much a new experience for me, because most of the contexts that I've been in have been kind of in rural settings, provincial towns. Tell you where I've been, just when I came out of college, first place that they sent me to was a small village in County Tyrone, Ochnacloy, where I would have looked after probably 4 churches again in rural settings. Then from there, I was stationed away down in the Republic of Ireland on a circuit that's known as the Port Leash Circuit. So again, very much the, as I say, Republic of Ireland setting and all that comes with that, and the various different churches that I was interacting with. I was there for 5 years. Before then I was stationed in Portadown. Again, quite a contrast. And then the final place where I was stationed before I retired was in Omagh in County Tyrone, where there were 5 churches and 2 of us looking after that and that setup there. And so retired, retiring age was 65. I worked on a few years after that and retired there. We came to settle in Ballymoney and got involved a little bit there, only a little bit, just helping out with preaching and visiting and so on, before somebody came calling. And so in 2018 then I started working part-time here in the Braniel.
Fab. And I think it's good that we maybe start, as we're chatting Church Beyond the Walls, and we're looking at mission and outreach and how that looks like in different settings and contexts. You've talked about a lot of different places there: Portadown, Omagh, Portlaoise. What did mission look like in those areas? Because obviously very different context from here in Braniel, where you're in a housing estate.
Yeah. Well, you know this anyway, that I am very traditional. Having been brought up in the Methodist Church all my days, as a child, our family lived in a town in County Tyrone called Strabane. When I was 12 years of age, was sent off to boarding school in Coleraine, and so I had a kind of that dual nationality, but still very much connected with the Methodist Church, because as a boarder at boarding school, we went to our different churches, mine being the Methodist Church. As it happened then, on leaving school, I settled in Coleraine, and Dorothy and I were married in Portstewart. We brought our family up in Coleraine. But all the while, having strong church connections during that time, my idea of mission was really mission without the outreach.
Okay.
In other words, it was done very much in the church context. I suppose on reflection, my own story goes back to my childhood in the 1950s. And it was through what you could basically call a mission that I decided to become a Christian. I was only a child at the time. But older people who may well be listening to this podcast may remember the name of an old minister long gone to glory, an old man called Dr. Headley Plunkett. What a name. But he was a force to be acknowledged, and he conducted a mission in Strabane Methodist Church, and that's the way it was in those days. And I suppose that would have been my idea of mission, various gospel missions, always willing to pay attention to what might have been going on with organisations such as the Faith Mission or the Christian Workers Union, as I would have remembered in my young day. And that was the idea where something happened in a church context and people were invited to come in. And of course, the years have changed. And whether we accept this or not, whether church people accept this or not, I feel myself that that model is probably not the best model nowadays, because we have to have mission and outreach. How you do that is difficult. And certainly in those contexts that I mentioned, where you're in those rural settings, and this is what was so different for me coming to Braniel, where your mission field was on your doorstep, because you're slap bang in the middle of a housing estate. And technically speaking, yes, you have neighbouring churches around you, but Braniel is the only church actually in the estate as such. So, in a sense, I feel for the churches, folks who might be listening now and saying, well, what can we pick up from the Braniel model? To use that expression, it's difficult. And I don't think I have worked that out as to what, other churches would do, what advice I would take. I mean, obviously now when I step down from Braniel, I'll be going back to, we live in Ballymoney, and I'll pick up my involvement again with Ballymoney Methodist Church. But what can I take from Braniel to give to Ballymoney is something that we'd have to sit down and think through. I don't know if that helps you in that question you asked me.
No, but I'm going to go back again, and then we'll dig more into Braniel. But let's take the likes of your Oma and Fitness. Let's go for Oma and Fitness Circuit, because that was your most recent one before Braniel.
Sure.
How did those people there connect? I'm eager to hear this, because there may be things there that we can learn as well, and that's why I love. That's why I really wanted to do this podcast. Was yes, we can share what we're doing, and hopefully that could help someone else with ideas. But also, I want to learn. I want to learn what other places are doing.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I may well have shortchanged those poor folks in that area, in that I wasn't clued in enough into the whole idea of reaching out into the community. That's why I've changed so much since coming to Braniel. And I say that because your mission field is on your doorstep. I mean, if we take the Oma town setting, incidentally, there were 5 churches on that circuit. There used to be, well, there could have been more. Certainly was 6 in relatively recent days. But when I came, there was 5. One minister looked after 3, a wee village called Fintona, the other village called Drumquin, and the well-known name in Irish Methodism, Tuckerdo. So one minister looked after those 3, and then I looked after the church in Oma, and then one out in a little townland known as Mayne, spelled Mayne. The setting there, I mean, certainly, talking about the Oma town setting, literally, though hopefully not physically, but there were 4 churches, 4 denominations within stone throwing distance of each other. You had the Methodist Church on one side of the street, Trinity Presbyterian Church on the other side of the street. A little bit up that same side was St. Columba's Church of Ireland, and across the footpath from that then was the Roman Catholic Chapel. Excuse me. Now, that's what I say. I mean, the hinterland, certainly to Oma Methodist Church, there were housing estates. I think it's probably fair to say, and I'll qualify this before I say it, but my understanding of those estates, because I wasn't knocking doors in those estates to go and visit congregation members of my own, most of those estates would have been probably, you could label them as a Roman Catholic estate. Is that a mission field for Roma Methodist Church? That's a question for somebody else to answer. And probably that's why I say that maybe I slightly shortchanged those people by not saying, where can we go? What can we do? And sadly, it was very much, use this expression advisedly, but it was almost a case of what we have, we hold.
Yeah.
You know,
No, that's...
we are a minority group, and Roma Methodist would have been a minority of those three other congregations plus their own. And so it was a case of, you know, we really have to maintain our building, we have to do this and that. And so how do we, and you know, moving on, though I'm retired in Ballymoney now, the Ballymoney Methodist Church would be the same type of setting, very much with Presbyterian churches all around, certainly a large Church of Ireland, and not far from Ballymoney Methodist, the Roman Catholic Chapel. So how do we find the mission field there? I think probably if I were going back to the Oma people, and I won't be, but if I were going back, I would be taking with me the experience that I've had from Braniel, that somehow, somewhere, some way, we must learn where it is that we have to reach out to or find out, because I'm sure that God has a mission field for us all.
Yeah. And the main reason, one of the main reasons why I thought it was really, really important that as we did this podcast, I wanted you to be the first person on here, is because I know you said there at the very start, you know, I'm a traditionalist.
Yeah.
And I suppose if we look at the context of Braniel Church, firstly, before we look beyond the walls, as the podcast is called, Braniel is not so traditional. And I suppose there's traditional aspects, if you like, rather than being necessarily, you know, hardcore traditional. But I suppose I remember you sharing a story with me about speaking at a men's breakfast once.
Yeah.
And do you want to share the story?
Well, I don't need to go into the details, but essentially I was asked by a minister in a gathering once. He threw a question at me, which I wasn't expecting. It was, how would you like to be remembered? And I thought, and I didn't have to think very long, and the answer was, and I stick by that answer, was I would like to be remembered as one who is always willing to embrace change. Yeah. Yes, I'm a traditionalist in that obviously I can't throw away my heritage. Yeah. I mean, what I gained when I was a child in Strabane Methodist Church, small though that church is, and it's smaller now, you know, those were where I got my core values, if you like.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I believe that we have to embrace the change and build on what we, on what our heritage is, and so I suppose that's basically my message. Where it's not change for change's sake.
Yeah.
It's definitely not change for change's sake. No. But I have learned enough in the 6 years that I've been in Braniel. And all the while, I mean, I was over 70 years when I came here, so you can do the maths. But I've been willing to learn during those 6 years here in Braniel, being willing to be guided by the folks around me, but more so, obviously, by the way God is leading us as a people. And it's certainly towards that whole idea of, as it says, church beyond the walls.
Yeah. And what, to say, you've been in Braniel 6 years now, and that time is coming to an end very, very shortly. What has God taught you through His Spirit in the midst of changing maybe your own mindset and shaped you over the past 6 years as we've journeyed on? There's been a lot of stuff that's happened. So how has God shaped you in that journey?
I think what He has confirmed is that I was right to give that answer to that other minister who asked me that question about how do you want to be remembered. That yes, I have been right to embrace change, and to say not just change for change's sake, but to see, and as Jesus said, I believe it was to Nicodemus, the wind bloweth where it listeth, as it said in the Authorized Version. So if the wind of change is blowing, that we have to be prepared to. And I think I've had that confirmed. And although, as I say, I won't be involved at the sharp end of ministry, as it were, I think that if anybody ever wants to pick my brains in whatever setting I find myself in the future, I'll be referring back to the experiences that I've had here in Braniel that have been, in the main, positive. And I suppose what I've learned too, and I don't know, I mean, I've been blessed to have good folks around me, not least yourself, as one who is willing to learn. And I've seen a people who have been willing to respond whatever leadership I might have given them, to the point where they say, yes, there's probably something in this if we, to use the other expression, if we think outside the box a little bit, and see where it is that God is taking us beyond the walls.
Okay. And this is sort of the last little section that I want to talk about. I want to get practical with this. What have you seen that's gone on in the past 6 years that, from a practical point of view, if there is someone from a church watching and they're struggling for ideas, or they're struggling for inspiration, or they're struggling for a direction, what are some of the things that you have seen happen that have offered you encouragement? Maybe a story you've heard of something that's happened. Just something that you could share, that might be good for someone else to hear.
Well, you'll not be surprised to hear me saying this, but certainly the amazing thing is that obviously during the past 6 years, there's been that huge great big chunk of time that has been taken up by COVID.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, or however it happened, and I think a lot of this is down to your prowess in being able to introduce it into technology and so on, that a lot of the good work continued during that time, and we did those various studies. But the one that sticks out is Organic Outreach for Churches, a book that was written by this guy from America called Kevin Harney, and 6 videos, or maybe 10, I think it was, yeah. But it was that one that we've mentioned on so many occasions, where he talks about churches being willing to make sacrifices, and he calls them heroic sacrifices. And obviously the reason he calls them heroic sacrifices, because they're so big, being willing to set aside things that we have held dear, but which really, when all is said and done, aren't absolutely necessary for outreach. I think probably everywhere I've gone, in all of those churches that I mentioned, every one of those churches, I was never minister of what you would call a huge church, and I was brought up in what was called a small church, namely Strabane away in County Tyrone. And you Strabane folks, if you're listening, you won't mind me saying that. But all of them would have said, oh, it would be lovely to have greater numbers. It would be lovely to have greater numbers. And I remember having a conversation with some of the folks in Omagh, particularly Omagh, because, as I say, it was where we had the conversation. And again, it was the same thing about lamenting numbers. Now, Omagh was a town that over the years changed. Sadly, an awful lot of the young church people, like many other provincial towns, certainly in west of the province, would have gone off to university, going to England, and then didn't come back. Omagh used to be a garrison town. The military was in Omagh, with the result that there were many, many people. There used to be quite a lot of industry around Omagh, and again, times that we're in, that probably changed. And the folks in Omagh would have seen church growth as people moving into the town who had a Methodist connection elsewhere, and then would have made their way to Oma Church. And that's fair enough. You know, your congregation grows and so on. But I think that just highlights what I've said, that those days are gone. And it was that for Oma. It's probably something else for whatever other town it might be, whether I was there or not. And folks have to see it not just as getting, sorry for using this expression, but bums on seats.
Yeah.
It's about reaching out to bring people into the kingdom of God.
Amen.
And, you know, that's why I say that the possibility is, and I don't know the history of all the places that I've been, but I would say that way, way back, and we know the history of John Wesley moving around the various places in Ireland that he did, and the people who followed him and so on, that obviously they were wanting to reach out and you know, even the involvement of the Methodist Church in open air preaching in those days. So the ethos was in reaching out with the gospel.
Yeah.
But something has settled over the years, and I think it needs a stir again.
Yeah. I think it's important. I'm glad you highlighted the Organic Outreach for Churches book, because I think it was. I think for us it was a pinnacle moment.
It was a
almost.
turning point. It had to be a
it really
turning
was.
point.
And that idea of the heroic sacrifice, and I'm going to share the story because you'll remember the story that the guy Kevin shared. Was the lady, was it Nancy? I think her name.
I
was?
can't remember.
I think it was. I think it was. I think it was Nancy, and she had said he had. The church was used to having traditional music, and Kevin was the pastor. He decided to bring his guitar
Yes.
one Sunday,
Yeah.
and he started singing a few songs on the guitar. And for anybody who is in ministry, when someone comes up to you after the service and says, "I need to speak to you tomorrow," you know you're you're in trouble.
Yeah, I actually was thinking a different story, but I know this.
right,
One. Yeah.
And so he agreed to meet her the following morning for a coffee or whatever it was, and she approached him and she said, "Pastor, I have to tell you this. I wasn't very happy with that music yesterday." And he said, "Oh, okay. What would you like me to do about it?" And her response was amazing. So this woman was obviously a big fan. She liked her traditional music. She liked her hymns. She liked her organ and whatever else. And her response was this: "I want you to keep it. I'm just telling you that I don't like it." But she says, "I know that my grandchildren and their friends and their age group will engage better with it. So I'm willing to let that go in order that we can connect with them." And for me, that was a big one. And I think actually for a lot of, especially some of the older folks in our congregation, were not necessarily on music, because we've been fairly reasonably contemporary anyway, but actually some other things, you know, that we hold on to them to dear life for dear life. And we don't want to let go of things, but actually sometimes you have to, for the greater good, to allow people to connect with Jesus.
That's it, you know. And as you tell that story, I'm kind of reflecting on just, as I say, the traditional background that I have, and so on. I used that expression earlier on, and I think if we're coming to an end now, I would want to say this in case that anybody from any of those circuits that I mentioned where I was on, including the one where I was brought up, which is Strabane, and the one where I probably spent a good part of my adulthood before actually going into the ministry, which was actually Coleraine Church. The funny thing about this experience that I've had over the past 6 years, I wish that this had come 30 years ago. And I would love to be able to go. I'll not be able to, my age will prevent me from doing this, but I'd love to go back to all those places where I've been and just gently share with them what my experiences have been, and probably gently apologize for, and I use that expression, short-changing them, because I know so much more now. And while, yes, at heart I'm traditionalist, but to be able to say, folks, we need to think outside the box. And it's not just going to happen because we want it. I remember when I was in business, and you would get a lot of these motivational speakers and sayings on one thing and another in a particular office that I used to work in, and here was this big thing hanging on the wall, this big sort of banner hanging on the wall. It won't happen unless you make it.
Yeah.
It won't happen unless you make it. And I'm not saying we come up and dream all sorts of dreams and come up with all sorts of plans, but I'm sure that I'm sure that what we have learned here in Braniel has been of God. And I would want other people to, as I say, to go back to those places and gently say, look, folks, we need to look at this in a different way. It would be a huge delight to me to go back to any of those places and be able to hear, actually, I tell you what, since you went away, we actually got that message anyway, and we're about our work now. That would be lovely,
Last question, and then we'll wrap up. If you could say one thing, if there's a church, if there's someone, a representative in leadership from a church, or even someone listening from a congregation somewhere that has a heart for the community they're in, and or a community that the church is facing into, what would you say to them if they're sort of, they don't know what to do? What would you say to them now with your experience? What would you say to them if they're sort of in that limbo land of uncertainty of what do we do? We want to reach out. What should we do?
That's a funny one. I'm just thinking of would I be at liberty to answer that question by saying what happened at our church council meeting the other evening and the individual who came to address us and the.
Go ahead.
Well, let's put it this way. I know that you and Braniel Church, and you'll be doing this after I've gone, that you're going to engage with an organisation known as Thrive Ireland.
Yeah.
And it was actually one of the council members. He won't mind if I mention his name. It was Bobby. And when you as a council were wondering, were you going to engage with this organisation, Thrive Ireland? What Bobby said on that occasion was, over these past few years, and certainly as a result of the likes of Organic Outreach for Churches, we have got out into the community. The other organisation, Mitch's organisation, Crown Jesus Ministries, helped us to get out into the community. And as Bobby said, we're getting out into the community, but we need to know what to do next. Mm. And I think the advice I would be giving, I hope I'm answering your question correctly, would be to find out what other organisations or agencies are available to help you, and that you don't have to do ministry on your own, that there are people there to help you. And I think our own Methodist Church in Ireland is willing to support us in those things, not least the fact that you've got set up now with your podcasts and so on. Yeah. So that's about it. I mean, that's... And
there's nothing else. Well, just one last thing to mention is there's nothing that beats a good away day to go and dream dreams.
Yeah.
And to think missionally and literally to go with the one. I remember we had a church council meeting and we went away with a one-item agenda and to the local golf club. Yeah. And just to sit down and we talked about our mission statement and it's this idea of, I think, what is God saying to us as a church family? What is he calling us to? And let's be willing to dream big with it. One of those ones, I remember, was it a quote somewhere, dream big and dream so big that if God's not in it, it won't happen.
That was, and he won't mind me saying it, I don't know if he'd be listening to this or not, but a colleague, friend of my own, the Reverend Des Bain, who, whenever he was Home Mission Secretary, said more or less what you're saying. We ought to be dreaming dreams so big that they're bound to fail unless God is in it. Yeah. And I suppose, really, the biggest dream that you can dream is to believe that God actually cares. You know the guy that I've quoted often, and I think it would be very remiss of me to let this podcast go by without mentioning the name of
Henry Blackaby.
Henry Blackaby.
Oh, there we go.
That was a study just that I did so many years ago, actually, whenever I was down in Portlaoise, first of all, and it was a lady in Portlaoise who introduced me to it. And it's simply called Experiencing God. Experiencing God. And the subtitle to that was Knowing and Doing the Will of God. And he had 7 realities of experiencing God. The first one, which is the only one I'm going to quote for, it's the only one I think I probably remember, is God is always at work around you. True. And it's actually believing that God is always at work around you. And that whole study goes on to say that it's not about us really dreaming up things to do. It's just finding out where God is at work and joining him in that work.
Amen unto that. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for the past 6 years. Thank you for the leadership you've given us. Thank you for the encouragement you've given me personally. And I'm delighted that you've been the first man on the podcast. And I hope that your I genuinely hope that your experience, as we're sharing with others, speaks to them today, and God uses it to help encourage people.
Amen to that.